The stars shimmered outside the viewing port of the TCMS Florence as it drifted through the Kelos sector. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge and watched the distant flashes of combat lighting up the darkness between two warring fleets. The year was 2347, and humanity had walked among the stars for nearly a century now. They had joined the Galactic Council 87 years ago and had earned a reputation not as warriors, but as healers and peacemakers. The Florence was the pride of Earth's Mercy Fleet. She was the largest hospital ship ever built by human hands, and carried 2,000 souls dedicated to saving lives, regardless of species or allegiance. "Captain, we're receiving another distress call," Lieutenant Marcus Webb said from the communication station. His voice carried the weariness of someone who had processed too many cries for help in recent weeks. Sarah nodded and moved closer to examine the coordinates. The Zathene Collective and the Ornesh Republic had been fighting over mineral rights in this sector for 3 months, and the casualties kept mounting. "How many wounded?" she asked. "The transmission says 47 critical cases, mixed Ornesh and Zathene soldiers, from a destroyer that took heavy fire." Sarah made her decision quickly. That was what they did, and that was what they had always done since humans first ventured beyond their home system. "Set course and increase speed. Tell medical to prep trauma bays 1 through 5. The Florence was clearly marked. Her white hull bore the Red Cross symbol that had meant medical neutrality on Earth for centuries, and now meant the same thing across 1,000 worlds. Every external light blazed with the universal signal for hospital ship. Every communication channel broadcast their peaceful intent in 43 different languages. Dr. Yuki Tanaka met Sarah in the corridor outside the main surgical wing. The chief medical officer looked exhausted but determined. "We've already treated 300 patients this week," Yuki said as they walked together. "Our supplies are holding, but barely." "I know," Sarah replied, "but that's the job, and Earth didn't send us out here to turn people away." In the crew quarters, nurses and doctors from a dozen different species prepared for the incoming wounded. Humans worked alongside Ornesh medics, and even a few Zathene who had chosen healing over fighting. That was the thing about the Mercy Fleet. It didn't take sides, and it didn't ask questions beyond what would save a life. The Florence reached the coordinates within 2 hours. The damaged destroyer hung in space like a broken toy and lifeless. Sarah watched as their rescue shuttles launched. Each one carried emergency medical teams ready to stabilize the wounded before transport. "Captain," Marcus called out suddenly. His voice had changed and carried a note of alarm that made Sarah's blood run cold. "What is it?" "We're being targeted. Multiple Zathene warships just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of scanner range." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't supposed to happen, and everyone knew the rules. Broadcast on all channels. Remind them we're a protected medical vessel under Council law. Marcus worked frantically at his console. "Broadcasting now. Captain, they're not responding." The bridge crew exchanged worried glances. In 87 years of human presence in galactic space, no one had ever fired on a hospital ship. "Keep broadcasting," Sarah ordered. "Get me a direct line to their command vessel." The main screen flickered to life and showed the angular features of a Zathene War Master. His scaled face held no expression that Sarah could read. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Confederation medical ship Florence. We are a neutral hospital vessel operating under—" "I know what you are," the War Master interrupted. His voice was cold and precise. "You heal our enemies and send them back to fight us again." Sarah felt ice spreading through her chest. "We heal everyone. That's the point of—" "You provide tactical advantage to the Ornesh," the War Master continued. "That makes you a legitimate military target." "That's insane," Sarah shouted. "We're protected under the civilized warfare protocols. Every species in the Council agreed." "War Master Thardon does not hide behind Council weakness," the alien said. "Your presence here ends now. The screen went dark. "Captain, they're charging weapons," Marcus screamed. Sarah grabbed the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, brace for impact." Damage control teams to... The first plasma bolt struck the Florence's port side and tore through the medical bays where doctors had been preparing to receive patients. The second blast hit the engine core. Sarah felt the deck lurch beneath her feet. Alarms shrieked through every corridor, and emergency lights painted everything red. "Get a message to Earth," she shouted over the noise. "Tell them what happened. Tell them." The third blast hit the bridge directly. War Master Thargon watched from his flagship as the human hospital ship broke apart. Debris and bodies spilled into the void like seeds from a broken pod. "Target destroyed," his weapons officer reported. "Good," Thargon said. "Now the Ornesh will know what happens when they rely on human mercy." 2,000 souls died in those moments. Doctors and nurses and patients who had believed the symbols on their hull meant something. The distress signal from the Florence reached Earth 6 hours later. It was automated and brief, and contained just enough information to tell the story. In the council chambers in Geneva, Ambassador Marcus Webb received the news while sitting in session with representatives from 40 species. He stood slowly, and his hands shook as he held the datapad. "Ambassador Webb?" the Arbiter asked. "Is something wrong?" Marcus looked around the chamber at the aliens who had become familiar over decades of cooperation. "The TCMS Florence has been destroyed. Deliberate attack by Zathene forces. No survivors. 2,000 dead." The chamber fell silent. Several species began speaking at once and offering condolences and assurances that this was unprecedented. Marcus raised his hand for silence. "War Master Thargon killed our healers. Humanity will respond." The council expected debate and discussion. They expected humanity to file complaints and seek reparations through proper channels. Instead, the message that came from Earth 12 hours later was simple and direct. Every human in council space received recall orders. Diplomats and traders and scientists and medical personnel all began returning home. Earth's defense perimeter activated fully for the first time since the First Contact War. Military communications went dark, and human vessels stopped responding to council hails. The final message from Earth to the Galactic Council was delivered by Admiral James Rodriguez from the command deck of a ship no one had known existed. "You have 72 hours to surrender War Master Thargon for trial. After that, we are no longer bound by your civilized warfare protocols. You killed our healers. Now you'll learn what we really are." The Galactic Council debated through the night, while across human space, something ancient and terrible began to wake. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with conversation as representatives from across known space debated humanity's ultimatum. Arbiter Velshara called for order, and her forearms gestured for calm. "This is clearly an overreaction," declared the Quellan ambassador. "Yes, what happened to the Florence was tragic, but humanity must work within established protocols." Ambassador Webb had not left Earth. In his place sat an empty chair, draped with a white cloth bearing the Red Cross symbol. War Master Thargon addressed the council via hologram from his flagship. He seemed amused by the entire situation. "The humans posture and threaten," he said. "But what can they actually do? Their fleet is small, and they have never shown military aggression. This is theater designed to extract compensation." The Council's Military Analysis Division presented their findings. Humanity maintained approximately 200 known military vessels, all defensive in nature. Their technology was adequate, but not exceptional. Their military history showed preference for negotiation over combat. "The humans are bluffing," concluded General Mortek of the Council Defense Force. "They lack the capacity to threaten a major power like the Zathene Collective." Across the galaxy, the 72-hour countdown became a spectacle. News feeds broadcast it constantly, while analysts debated human intentions. On Earth, something very different was happening. Sarah Chen's daughter, Rachel, stood in the Memorial Plaza in Geneva and watched as names were being carved into black stone. 2,000 names, and each one a person who had believed in mercy. Rachel was a captain herself. She commanded a cargo vessel in the civilian fleet, or so everyone had believed until 3 days ago. The message had come encrypted and direct. Report to staging area Zebra 7, contingency protocol is active. Your real assignment begins now. Rachel had known this day might come. Every human in the fleet had known, and had been preparing since they were teenagers. The contingency protocol had been created after the First Contact War in 2260. Humanity had barely survived that conflict and had learned a terrible lesson about the universe. The galaxy was not safe, and mercy was not universal. While Earth had presented a peaceful face to the Council, they had also prepared for the possibility of total war. Hidden shipyards in the Kuiper Belt had been building vessels for 8 decades. They were disguised as mining operations and ice processing facilities. On Mars, beneath the terraforming colonies, entire factories had been producing weapons and ammunition. The Red Planet's civilian infrastructure concealed military production on a scale the Council could not imagine. Every human colony had underground bunkers and hidden armories. Every civilian ship had been designed with military conversion in mind. The seemingly peaceful cargo hauler Rachel commanded could deploy weapons in under 30 minutes. Her crew of 20 civilians were all trained combat personnel. Across human space, millions of reservists received activation orders. The galaxy had assumed humans were primarily traders and doctors, but every human completed mandatory military training at age 16. Admiral James Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the TDF Indomitable and watched the countdown clock. He was 70 years old and had spent his entire career preparing for this moment while hoping it would never come. "Status report," he said quietly. "All fleet elements in position," his tactical officer replied. 4,000 vessels ready across 31 systems. Stealth fields holding. The Council hasn't detected our deployment. Rodriguez allowed himself a thin smile. Those 4,000 ships had been positioned over the past 8 decades, moving slowly and carefully into strategic locations throughout Council space. They had been hiding in plain sight, disguised as asteroids and derelict stations and debris fields. Some had been waiting for 50 years. The clock reached 0. Rodriguez opened a channel to every human military vessel in the galaxy. The 72 hours have expired. The Zathene Collective chose to keep their War Master. They chose this. Execute Operation Righteous Fury. Across 30 systems, human ships dropped their stealth fields simultaneously. On the Council flagship near the Zathene homeworld, sensors suddenly lit up with contacts. The sensor officer stared at his display in disbelief. "Sir, I'm reading multiple contacts. Hundreds of ships just appeared. They're human vessels, and they're armed. In the Kelos sector, where the Florence had died, 300 human warships materialized around the Zathene patrol fleet that had been celebrating their victory. At the Zathene military headquarters on Zatharas Prime, warning alarms began screaming as orbital platforms detected incoming missiles. Admiral Rodriguez broadcast on all Council frequencies. We tried peace. You chose this. Humanity is no longer bound by the civilized warfare protocols. All Zathene military assets are now legitimate targets. The first strikes were surgical and devastating. Human railguns fired projectiles at 70% the speed of light. The Zathene shields had been designed to stop energy weapons and plasma bolts, not solid metal, moving at relativistic speeds. Zathene command stations exploded as tungsten rods punched through them like paper. Communication satellites around 6 Zathene worlds went dark simultaneously as human electronic warfare systems took control and shut them down. Supply depots that had been stockpiling weapons for the Ornesh campaign erupted in flames as precision missiles found their targets. The Zathene had been a military power for 10,000 years. They had crushed civilizations and conquered systems and never known defeat. In 6 hours, humanity reduced their military capacity by 40%. War Master Thargon stood on his bridge and watched the tactical display with growing horror. Everywhere he looked, his forces were being systematically destroyed. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "The humans had no fleet." "Our intelligence said." "Our intelligence was wrong, War Master," his second officer said quietly. "The humans deceived us. They deceived everyone." A communication came through from Zathene High Command. The War Master who appeared on screen looked shaken. "Thargon, what have you done? The humans are attacking everything. They're not following any rules of engagement. They're targeting supply lines and civilian factories and infrastructure. This isn't civilized warfare." Thargon felt something he had never experienced before. It took him a moment to recognize it as fear. "I will crush them," he said. "The Zathene have never been defeated. I will gather our forces and—" "You don't understand," the other War Master interrupted. "They're not fighting to win territory or resources. An intercepted communication from their admiral used a term we don't have in our language, total war. Their goal isn't to defeat us. It's to destroy our ability to ever fight again." The screen flickered and showed footage from a human attack on a Zathene weapons factory. The building hadn't just been damaged, but had been completely obliterated, and the surrounding area was cratered. "They want to break us," Thargon whispered. "No," his intelligence officer said. "They want to make an example of us, so that no one ever attacks their healers again." Rachel Chen led her squadron of converted cargo ships in a strike against a Zathene fuel depot. The engagement lasted 7 minutes and ended with the depot scattered across 3,000 kilometers of space. As her ships regrouped, she looked at the image she kept on her command console. It showed her mother Sarah standing on the bridge of the Florence and smiling. "This is for you, Mom," Rachel whispered. "For you and for everyone who believed mercy mattered." The galaxy watched in shock as humanity revealed what it truly was. Not a species of peaceful traders and gentle doctors, but something far more dangerous. They were a species that had chosen peace, but had never forgotten how to wage war. And now that choice had been taken from them. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, while Arbiter Velshara tried desperately to maintain order. "The humans must cease this barbaric campaign immediately," demanded the Quellan ambassador. "They are violating every principle of civilized warfare." Admiral Rodriguez appeared via hologram, and his image towered over the council floor. His face was carved from stone, and his eyes held no warmth. "You want us to stop?" he asked. "Then you don't understand what's happening here. This isn't a border dispute or a trade disagreement. War Master Thargon attacked a hospital ship. He killed healers and patients and children. He declared that your rules mean nothing." "But surely we can negotiate," Velshara began. "No," Rodriguez cut her off. "You see war as a game with rules and honor and limited objectives. When someone shows they have no limits, we respond in kind." The Ornesh ambassador stood. His species had been fighting the Zathene for months. "Admiral, we appreciate your support, but these tactics you're using, destroying civilian infrastructure and supply lines, this seems excessive." Rodriguez turned his cold gaze on the Ornesh. "You want us to fight your way? Line up our ships and have honorable battles? That's not how humans survive. We fight to win completely. We destroy the enemy's capacity to make war, and their will to continue." "This is madness," someone shouted from the gallery. "This is total war," Rodriguez replied, "and you should all take careful note of it, because the next species that attacks our medical personnel will learn the same lesson." The broadcast ended, and the council sat in stunned silence. On Zatharas Prime, citizens watched human ships orbit their homeworld. The vessels didn't fire and didn't attack. They simply waited. But nothing came in or went out. The blockade was absolute. Food shipments were turned back. Medical supplies were confiscated. Communication satellites had been destroyed days ago. The Zathine were used to being the predators. Now they were learning what it felt like to be prey. War Master Thargon tried to rally his forces. He broadcast messages calling for Zathine warriors to remember their pride and their 10,000-year history of conquest. The humans responded by broadcasting something else. On every Zathine frequency, on every screen in Zathine space, the same footage played. Security recordings from the Florence's final moments. Doctors trying to shield patients as the walls exploded around them. Nurses burned alive while attempting to evacuate the pediatric ward. Captain Sarah Chen's last words as the bridge collapsed, "Tell Earth we died doing our duty." After the footage, a simple message in Zathine language. "You killed healers. You killed those who showed mercy. What mercy do you deserve?" The psychological impact was devastating. Zathine soldiers began to question their war master's decision. In the Kelos sector, a Zathine patrol fleet encountered a human strike force. The Zathine commander tried to surrender. "We don't want to fight," he broadcast. "War Master Thargon was wrong. We acknowledge this." The human response was cold. "Your acknowledgement is noted. Disarm your vessels and proceed to these coordinates for internment." Not all Zathine surrendered. Many fought with the forced pride of their warrior culture. They learned that humans were terrifyingly adaptable. In one battle, Zathine forces used a traditional pincer movement. Human ships appeared to retreat in disarray. The Zathine pressed their advantage, pursuing what they thought was a broken enemy. Too late, they realized they had been led into a trap. Human vessels emerged from behind asteroids and caught the Zathine fleet in a crossfire. In another engagement, Zathine commanders tried to use their superior numbers. They had 5 ships for every human vessel. But the humans didn't fight fair. They used drones and autonomous weapons and electronic warfare. One human destroyer could coordinate attacks from 1,000 small strike craft. The Zathine military doctrine was based on honor and tradition. Humans had no such limitations. Captain Rachel Chen led a group called the Ghosts. They were special forces who specialized in unconventional warfare. They infiltrated Zathine installations using stolen access codes. They sabotaged supply convoys with delayed action explosives. They spread misinformation through hacked communication channels. Ghosts in the corridors became a whispered fear among Zathine soldiers. They started seeing threats everywhere and trusting no one. One night, a Zathine military base went dark. When power was restored, they found that someone had painted red crosses on every wall. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe from humanity's reach. War Master Thargon made a desperate decision. He would commit the Grand Fleet to a decisive battle. The Grand Fleet was the pride of the Zathine collective. 10,000 warships that had been assembled over centuries. They had crushed rebellions and conquered systems and never known defeat. Thargon chose his battlefield carefully, near the human colony of New Britannia, where he expected humans to defend their civilians. "We will break them here," he told his commanders. "We will show the galaxy that Zathine power is still supreme." The Grand Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. It was a sight that had terrified species for millennia. Admiral Rodriguez watched the display from the Indomitable. They finally committed everything. Tactical, execute gauntlet protocol. "Sir, we could hit them now while they're forming up," his weapons officer suggested. "No," Rodriguez said. "Let them see what they think is victory first. Let them feel confident." The human fleet at New Britannia was small, only 300 ships against 10,000. The Zathine advanced in their traditional formation. War Master Thargon watched with satisfaction as the human vessels began to retreat. "They run," he announced. The humans flee before Zathene might. His bridge crew cheered. Perhaps this war could still be won after all. Then the sensors started screaming. Behind the Grand Fleet, space itself seemed to ripple. 1,000 human ships dropped their stealth fields. Above and below the Zathene formation, asteroid installations activated. They had been positioned there over 80 years and had waited patiently for this moment. "It's a trap!" someone shouted on Thargon's bridge. The gauntlet closed around the Grand Fleet like a fist. Railgun slugs tore through Zathene shields. Missiles launched from every direction. The human ships that had retreated turned and joined the attack. For 4 hours, the Grand Fleet fought desperately. They destroyed 200 human vessels, but lost 6,000 of their own. When Thargon finally ordered the retreat, less than 4,000 ships escaped. The rest were debris. The War Master sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display. Half his Grand Fleet was gone. "How?" he whispered. "How did they do this?" His intelligence officer had the answer. "They've been planning this for decades, War Master. Those asteroid bases were positioned before we even started our war with the Ornesh. They knew we would commit everything eventually. They were patient." Thargon understood now. Humans didn't just fight battles and they fought wars. They thought in decades and planned for every possibility. A communication came through from Zathras Prime. The planetary governor's face was pale. "War Master, human ships are in orbit. They demand unconditional surrender. They say if we refuse, they will begin orbital bombardment. Not of military targets, but of everything. They will turn our homeworld into a wasteland." Thargon made his decision. "Tell them I will turn myself over if they spare the homeworld." The response from Admiral Rodriguez was delivered personally. 72 hours ago, we would have accepted your surrender. Now you pay the full price. Your collective will be dissolved, your military disbanded, your worlds occupied. You wanted total war. You're getting it. War Master Thargon realized the terrible truth. Humanity hadn't been fighting to win territory or resources. They had been fighting to make an example, to ensure no species would ever make the same mistake again. The siege of Zathras Prime entered its 3rd week, and the Zathene homeworld sat in darkness. Human vessels maintained perfect blockade formation. Not a single ship escaped, and not a single supply transport got through. But the humans weren't bombarding the planet. They were doing something far more psychologically devastating. They were starving it. Admiral Rodriguez had studied Earth's military history extensively. He knew that sometimes the cruelest weapon was patience. No food in, no medicine in, no power generation supplies in, he told his fleet commanders. Let them sit in the dark and think about what their war master cost them. On the planet's surface, Zathene citizens began to turn against their military leadership. Protests erupted in major cities. "This is Thargon's fault," they shouted. "He brought this nightmare upon us." The humans broadcast footage 24 hours a day. Images from the Florence played on loop and showed the faces of everyone who had died. Doctors from 17 different species. Nurses who had dedicated their lives to healing. A 7-year-old human girl who had been visiting her mother at work. Each face had a name and a story. The message was relentless. These were the people you killed. These were the innocents your war master destroyed. Zathene morale collapsed across multiple systems. Entire fleets began surrendering independently without waiting for orders from command. In the outer colonies, Zathene governors renounced the collective and sued for separate peace. The empire that had stood for 10,000 years was fracturing. War Master Thargon watched his civilization crumble. He retreated to a secured bunker on a remote moon and tried to coordinate guerrilla resistance. Captain Rachel Chen and her ghost unit received their orders directly from Admiral Rodriguez. Bring him back alive. Make it public. The hunt lasted 3 weeks across 7 systems. The ghosts tracked Thargon through intercepted communications and bribed informants. Many Zathene were now willing to sell out their War Master for the promise of food and safety. On a frozen moon designated Outpost 7 Gamma, Thargon made his last stand. He had 200 loyal soldiers and enough supplies for a month. Rachel's team of 40 ghosts surrounded the installation. "We could breach in an hour," her second-in-command suggested. "No," Rachel said. "We wait." The siege lasted 5 days. No power, no heat, no resupply. The humans simply sat outside and monitored communications. They knew exactly how much food the Zathene had and exactly when it would run out. On day 3, Thargon tried to rally his troops. "We are Zathene warriors. We don't surrender to humans." On day 4, the soldiers started arguing among themselves. Some wanted to fight their way out, while others talked about surrender. On day 5, the food ran out. That night, Thargon's own soldiers mutinied. They bound their War Master in chains and carried him outside. Rachel Chen stood in the snow and watched as the Zathene soldiers approached. They looked defeated and broken. "We surrender War Master Thargon for trial," their leader said. "Please, we're just soldiers. We were following orders." Rachel looked at the chained War Master. He was still defiant, and his eyes burned with hatred. "You'll get fair treatment under the Terran Convention," she told the soldiers, "unlike what your War Master gave our people." The transport back to Earth took 2 weeks. Thargon was kept in a cell with a window. He watched as human ships moved through space with military precision. He saw their massive industrial stations and hidden weapons platforms. "You deceived us all," he said to Rachel when she came to check on him. "The galaxy thought you were weak." "We were never weak," Rachel replied. "We just preferred peace. My mother believed in that. She died believing it. And because of you, the galaxy will never see that peaceful side of humanity again. They'll always know what we become when our mercy is violated." Rachel showed him an image of Sarah Chen. "She was my mother. She commanded the Florence. She spent her whole career saving lives, including Zathene lives, and you killed her." Thargon looked at the image. For the first time, something like regret flickered across his face. Earth's sky was gray when the transport landed at Geneva. Billions watched the broadcast as War Master Thargon was led in chains through the streets. They were silent, and their silence was somehow more powerful than any shouting could have been. The International Court of Justice at The Hague had been expanded to accommodate the trial. Representatives from every council species were invited to observe. Thargon expected a quick execution. He wanted martyrdom and expected to die as a warrior. Instead, he got something far worse. He got justice. The trial lasted 3 months. Prosecutors presented evidence from the Florence's black box recordings. They showed footage of the attack, and they named every victim. 2,000 counts of murder. Violations of the civilized warfare protocols. Crimes against sapient rights. War crimes for targeting protected medical personnel. Thargon's defense argued that he had believed the Florence was providing tactical advantage to his enemies. The human prosecutor was a woman named Michelle Torres. She had lost her sister in the attack. "The defendant claims military necessity," she said in her closing argument, but the Florence had treated Zathene wounded as well as Ornesh. The medical records show that 47 Zathene soldiers were scheduled for surgery on the day the ship was destroyed. Those soldiers died too. The defendant killed his own people because he wanted to make a point. Torres pointed at Thargon. He didn't attack the Florence because it was helping his enemies. He attacked it because he could. Because he wanted to show that Zathene power acknowledged no limits. Well, he learned that humanity also has no limits when you cross certain lines. The verdict came after 2 weeks of deliberation, guilty on all counts. Thargon stood as the chief judge read the sentence. He expected death, and was prepared to face it with warrior's pride. War Master Thargon, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of release. You will spend the rest of your natural life thinking about the 2,000 innocents you murdered. You want it to be remembered. You will be, as the being who broke the Zathene Collective, and who taught the galaxy what happens when you attack Earth's healers. The former War Master felt something break inside him. They weren't going to give him the warrior's death he craved. They were going to make him live with what he had done. The Zathene Collective's remaining leadership was brought to Earth a month later. Admiral Rodriguez addressed them in the same council chamber where this had all begun. Your collective is dissolved as of today. Your military is disbanded. Every warship will be scrapped. Every weapons platform decommissioned. Human occupation forces will remain on your worlds for 1 generation. You will learn new ways. The Zathene elder who spoke for them looked old and tired. What you're describing is the end of our culture. The Zathene have been warriors for 10,000 years. And look where it got you, Rodriguez replied. War Master Thargon destroyed your entire civilization because he couldn't accept that healers should be protected. You'll learn a new culture, one based on cooperation instead of conquest. Or you'll learn what total annihilation looks like. The choice is yours. The elder bowed his head. We accept your terms. Across Zathene space, human reconstruction teams began their work. Weapons factories were converted to produce civilian goods. Military academies became schools for medicine and engineering. Warrior traditions were redirected toward peaceful competition. It was the first time in galactic history that one species had forcibly reformed another. The galaxy watched and learned. On the first anniversary of the Florence attack, a memorial was unveiled at Geneva. 2,000 names, carved in black stone, and each one lit by an eternal flame. Captain Rachel Chen stood with other survivors' families. She placed flowers at her mother's name. They'll never forget, Mom, she whispered. The whole galaxy will remember what happened when they attacked our healers. You and everyone else on the Florence. You became the reason we'll have real peace now, because everyone knows the price of breaking it. Above Earth, construction began on a new vessel. She would be called the Florence II, and she would be the most advanced hospital ship ever built. And beneath her Red Cross symbol, a new motto in every galactic language: protected by law, guarded by memory, attack at the peril of your civilization. 20 years had passed since the Florence fell from the sky in pieces. The galaxy had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The Zathene worlds were rebuilding under a new federation that valued cooperation over conquest. Admiral James Rodriguez was 90 years old now and retired. He spent his days teaching at the Terran Military Academy, where cadets studied the war that had reshaped galactic civilization. The course was called The Florence Incident and the Doctrine of Total War. Every cadet, human and alien alike, studied what had happened when humanity's mercy was violated. On the former Zathene homeworld of Zathras Prime, renamed New Harmony, a young student named Kira prepared for her off-world education journey. She had been born 3 years after the war ended and had grown up in a very different society than her parents. The warrior culture was gone, replaced by emphasis on medicine and engineering and art. Kira's parents still spoke of the old days sometimes, how the Zathene had once ruled 30 systems and commanded the mightiest fleet in the sector. Now, they were farmers and teachers and scientists. The occupation had ended 5 years ago, but the changes remained. Kira had won a prestigious scholarship to study xenobiology on Earth. It was a honor that would have been unthinkable in her grandparents' time. The transport journey took 2 weeks. Kira spent the time reading about Earth's history and trying to understand the species that had broken her people's empire. When the ship approached Earth's orbit, she pressed her face to the viewport. The planet was blue and green and beautiful. But surrounding it were the orbital defense platforms, silent reminders of humanity's true nature. Geneva's university district welcomed students from across the galaxy. Kira found herself in classes with Ornesh and Quellen, and a dozen other species. And humans. Always humans with their quick smiles and friendly demeanor. It was strange. These were the people who had crushed the Zathine collective with overwhelming force. Yet they seemed so normal and so kind. During orientation, Kira met with her academic advisor, an elderly human woman named Dr. Sarah Rodriguez. "You're related to the Admiral?" Kira asked nervously. "He's my grandfather," Dr. Rodriguez said with a smile. "But don't worry, we don't hold grudges against the younger generation. What happened was tragic, but it's in the past. You weren't even born yet." Kira relaxed slightly. "I want to understand. Everyone back home says the humans are kind, but also terrifying. I need to know which is true." "Both," Dr. Rodriguez said honestly. "We're capable of great compassion and great violence. The key is understanding when each is appropriate." As the semester progressed, Kira learned about human culture. She studied their history of warfare and peace, their capacity for both mercy and ruthlessness. One day, her history professor assigned a field trip to the Florence Memorial. Kira stood before the black stone wall and read the names. 2,000 individuals who had died because of War Master Thargon's decision. They were healers, the professor explained, doctors and nurses, people who had chosen to save lives, and they treated everyone equally. Zathine soldiers received the same care as anyone else. Kira felt shame burning in her chest. Why did Thargon do it? Pride, the professor said. He couldn't accept that his enemies would be healed. He saw compassion as weakness. He learned otherwise. That evening, Kira did something unexpected. She requested permission to visit War Master Thargon. The prison was on an island near Geneva. Security was intense, but they allowed her through after checking her credentials. Thargon was an old male now. His scales had dulled, and his eyes held the weight of 2 decades of regret. "Why did you come?" he asked when she entered the visiting room. "I need to understand," Kira said. "I'm Zathine. I live with the consequences of what you did, but I don't understand why." Thargon was silent for a long moment. "I thought humans were weak because they valued mercy. I saw their hospital ships as targets of opportunity. I believed I was showing Zathine's strength. And now? Now I understand that mercy was their strength. When they showed mercy, it was a choice. They could have been ruthless from the beginning. They chose not to be. And when I took that choice away, when I attacked their healers, they showed me what they really were." Thargon gestured around the cell. "I expected execution. I wanted a warrior's death. Instead they gave me this. 20 years to think about what I cost my people. 50 more years ahead of me if I live that long. Every day I see the faces of the 2,000 I killed. The humans make sure I never forget." Kira leaned forward. "Was it worth it?" "No," Thargon said quietly. "I destroyed our entire civilization for nothing. I killed innocent healers because I was too arrogant to see that the rules of war exist for a reason. Never confuse kindness with weakness. That's the lesson I learned too late." After the visit, Kira walked through Geneva's evening streets. She found herself at a small park near the university. Admiral Rodriguez sat on a bench feeding birds. He was frail now, but his eyes were still sharp. "It wasn't a question. How did you know?" "Security alerts," the old admiral smiled. "I like to keep track of who visits him. Most people want to spit on him. You went seeking understanding. That's different." Kira sat beside him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret it? The total war, the occupation, all of it?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it. Thargon killed 2,000 innocent people. One of them was my daughter Sarah. She commanded the Florence." Kira felt her breath catch. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago," Rodriguez said, "but I think about her every day. She believes so deeply in the mission, in the idea that healing should transcend politics and conflict. And someone killed her for it." "So you made an example of us?" "Yes," Rodriguez admitted, We made sure the entire galaxy understood that there are lines you don't cross. You don't attack hospitals. You don't kill healers. You don't murder children in medical wards. Cross those lines, and you face total annihilation. That seems harsh. It's meant to be, Rodriguez said. Before the Florins, species thought they could violate the rules of war and face minor consequences. Now they know better. In the 20 years since, not a single hospital ship has been attacked anywhere in Council space. My daughter and her crew died, but their deaths created a protection that has saved millions of lives. Kira thought about this. So their sacrifice had meaning. That's what I tell myself, Rodriguez said quietly. That's what lets me sleep at night. The next day, Kira attended the unveiling of a new vessel. The TCMS Florence II was the most advanced hospital ship ever constructed. Captain Rachel Chen, now an admiral herself, presided over the ceremony. She was Sarah Chen's daughter, and she had spent 20 years building the new Mercy fleet. The Florence II carries the legacy of everyone we lost, Rachel said in her speech. She represents humanity's commitment to healing, but she also represents our promise. Attack our healers and face consequences that will echo for generations. The ship was magnificent, gleaming white hull with the Red Cross symbol. But Kira noticed something else. Weapon ports along the hull, escort destroyers taking up formation around her. Hospital ships are still protected, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Kira. But now they travel with guards. We learn that displaying mercy requires being capable of violence. That evening, the Florence II departed on her maiden voyage. A medical crisis in the outer reaches required humanitarian assistance. Ships from every species gave her wide berth. Respectful distance. P. On her hull, beneath the Red Cross, an inscription in 43 languages read, "Protected by the laws of war, guarded by the memory of 2000, attack at the peril of your entire civilization." Kira stood with Admiral Rodriguez and watched the ship disappear into faster-than-light travel. "You changed the galaxy," she said. "The galaxy changed itself," Rodriguez replied. "We just reminded everyone why the rules exist, why mercy matters, why some lines should never be crossed. And if someone crosses them again?" The old Admiral's eyes grew cold. "Then they'll learn the same lesson the Zathin learned. Humanity is kind by choice, not by nature. Take away that choice and you face something far worse than any warrior race. You face a species that understands total war, and has the patience to wage it for generations." Kira returned to her studies with new understanding. The humans were indeed both kind and terrifying. They offered healing with one hand, and held a weapon in the other. They smiled and laughed, and helped their neighbors. But they also remembered every wrong, and prepared for every possibility. Years later, when Kira became a professor herself, she taught the same lesson to her students. The humans showed us that true strength isn't the absence of violence. It's the choice to use violence only when absolutely necessary. And when that choice is taken away, when you force their hand by attacking their most sacred principles, you discover that mercy was the only thing holding back something far more dangerous. The Florence incident became the foundation of a new galactic order, one where medical personnel were truly protected, where the rules of war actually mattered, where species understood that violating certain principles would bring total destruction. War Master Thargon spent his remaining years in that cell. A living reminder of what happened when someone forgot that kindness was a choice. And humanity, patient and prepared, continued to offer mercy to the galaxy, while never forgetting what they became when that mercy was rejected.